And we are live, I think. Yes, and we are live. Hello, friends. How's it going? Oops, I need to mute myself. How's it going? Hi, Tina. Hello. My chat window seems to be very small right now. Let me try.
No. What's up, everyone?
This is Keith, and we will say, where are you guys all coming in from? Let us know where you guys coming in from. Yeah, we're super excited to do this well. I gotta thank Keith again for doing this. And you're gonna be building and deploying a full Python API during this workshop. All right, well, maybe I'll give a brief introduction for Keith. Actually, Keith, do you want to give a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. I will share my screen too. I'll throw a little slideshow up as we go, as people kind of trickle in too. But excited for this. This is going to be fun. Give me 1 second. Cool.
Hello, hey Abras, hey Ivers. Hello, Nilamad. Hi. That one minority. So glad to catch this live, right? Oh, I'm glad that you're here. From AWS Cloud Engineer to whom? Hi, Keith, says Alex.
What's up? All
Mila, hey,
right.
Keith, Tina from New York. Yeah,
Where's
I'm
the
in.
farthest viewer from so far? And just for context,
Oh,
I'm in the Boston area, so I'm East Coast, United States.
I'm in Austin right now, which is that in the middle? I don't even know where that is.
You're pretty central.
Okay, yes. Well, it is like CST, so Central Time.
Yeah, yeah. It does kind of
Um,
throw me off that it's only 1 hour behind uh, East Coast. I kind of always expect it to be 2 hours, but
it's Mountain Time, right?
yeah.
2 hours.
So I see Morocco and Italy. Sweet.
Morocco, New Zealand, Spokane, Washington, Nebraska,
Ooh,
India.
nice.
India, thanks for making it. I know it's kind of late in the Oceania and Asia regions, so appreciate it. Italy, Germany, Poland, Germany, one of my favorite countries. First time watching one of these, but transitioning from systems administration to cybersecurity and want to get some Python learnings. Originally from Chicago, but now in LV. Hello. Hey Bob, Canada. Did you hear of Roman farce? Did you hear of Roman? No. I'm not sure what that means. But we are around 2 minutes in Louisiana. Nice. I love Louisiana. One of my favorite places too. Thailand. Okay, I figured,
Awesome.
Keith, do you want to just give like a brief intro about yourself, like super brief,
Yep.
and then we can get started?
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. So what's up, everyone? Super excited to be here. My name's Keith Galley. A little bit about me. I have my bachelor's and master's in computer science from MIT. Always been a math nerd. Studied computer science at MIT and kind of applied that mathematical knowledge. CS is a great way to do that. So same type of logical thinking. A lot of fun. I'm currently a founding engineer at a company called Crater AI. We're a super small startup, 5 person, but hopefully some exciting things coming our way with what we're building right now. So more updates on that front. But I think that some people here might know me from the educational YouTube channel that I have. I make a lot of Python focused videos. So I guess my niche is kind of Python meets data science. So a lot of pandas videos, a lot of like NumPy, real world projects. So that's kind of where I live at on my channel. Feel free to check it out. And then I'm also very professional, as you can tell, with making slideshows. So
Wow, Keith,
hope.
is this on Photoshop or
Yeah,
is
this
it?
is Photoshop. Just a quick use the object detection tool and just threw some pictures in here. But a little about me. But agenda for today, we have an hour, so hopefully we can get through everything. If we don't get through everything, I would say feel free to leave comments like on this live stream, and I'll do my best over the next like week or two to just see if there's any comments that I can answer, and then I also guess for context too, I'm going to work on kind of putting what we're going through today into a tutorial on my own channel. So I might try to address some questions that maybe we can't answer during this session, in a couple weeks when I make my own channels tutorial. But we'll start with a quick little overview of APIs. Probably be a refresher for a lot of people, but I think it's just good to set the kind of scene of why we're even talking about APIs to begin with. Then we'll spend the bulk of this session building and deploying an API with Python and Flask and a couple other cool libraries to just make it a little bit more full scale, full picture. Then I'll try to leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end for some Q&A.
Awesome.
So-
One thing, sorry to interrupt, Keith.
No, you're good.
Anybody who wants to get ready and then code along, download the starter code. It's in the pinned comments. So it's on GitHub. You can clone it or download it, and then you can follow along as Keith is coding as well. So
Yeah.
please, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. That's good call out. And if people have any issues, I would say if you run into any issues as you're trying to follow along, don't worry too much about it. I would say just follow along, and then the video will be here. I'll try to answer some questions after the session's over via the comments. But all right, let's just talk about real quick, kind of a quick overview of why we're using APIs here. I think just set the scene. So I'm going to, paint the picture a little bit. So here I am, back-end engineer, and we're going to be working on a Python or an app that basically lets us review books and rate books. And right now we have some Python code that lets us do that. But really it's not super accessible to others. People don't want to have to run Python code, especially if you're trying to deploy this app for your mom to use or something. She's not going to be able to, she might not, know how to code, and it might be a little tricky for her to run this Python code to rate books and see all your ratings. So, back-end engineering side, take care of that. And then on the other side, we want to build an application to rate and, save our ratings of books. So we have a front-end engineer working here, Geeth Callie, and Geeth is responsible for building a mobile interface for this book rating application. And so really the reason that I like to spin up APIs, as we're going to kind of go through in this session, it's just a very quick and efficient way. And ultimately, I have no expertise in front-end engineering, unlike Geeth here. And when I want to write a bunch of Python code and actually build an application, build a web app, etc., usually it's important for me to have all that Python code encapsulated in an API, and then bring in a front-end expert to help make this actually a real thing. So the basic flow kind of is I can focus, over here on the Python code on the server side, the back end, and might have a front-end engineer working over here. And as long as you can provide a little bit of an API to access your Python code on the back end and kind of send data back for them to populate on the front end, you're in a very good spot. It makes it way easier to work with teammates. So being able to deploy these quickly is super helpful for deploying applications quickly. And I'll pause there. Any questions that I should address in the chat?
Is anybody having any trouble opening the starter code? Now is the time to ask. Yeah, starter code. It looks like we're okay. Hello, everyone from Washington State. Hello. I think we should be okay.
Cool,
We will
cool.
count to five.
All right.
4.
We'll keep watching it too.
You'll be okay. Yeah, I'll be here. If you have any trouble, just write something in the chat. I'll get back to you.
Yeah. So ideally what we're trying to build here is this kind of string where we have our Python code running, and you can just on the front end or anywhere else, you could run a command, hit this URL, and get a rating, basically get get a request and have some Python code kind of run behind the scenes to actually do that. So that's what we're trying to aim for here, having that URL that we can access. Just a little bit of extra context on APIs. These are, I would say, the 4 main commands that you'll probably see within REST API world. You might also see delete But these are a little bit of information on them. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we'll be kind of focusing on getting and posting data in this tutorial. And then finally, just want to mention like API's broader scope, like any big platform that you want to be able to access programmatically, they usually offer APIs. So just listing some here. If you want to do something in your application that's financial payments related, you might tap into Stripe's API. If you wanted to like automatically post YouTube videos or automatically pull your YouTube analytics data, you might use the YouTube API. Twilio is a cool API if you want to like program like a phone number to be able to like text and receive text messages and text people back. Maybe you put like a little bot up and it can respond via SMS. Like you could use Twilio to programmatically do calls and messaging. And then I think most people here are probably pretty familiar with OpenAI at this point, but I think it's really fun playing around with ChatGPT on chat.openai.com. But if you ever wanted to build your own custom program with OpenAI, like you're going to want to use the OpenAI API. So just some examples here. But I think with that being said, let's get into the meat of the session here and actually go ahead and start building and deploying an API with Python and Flask. So this is pinned in the YouTube chat. It's on a specific branch. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, it's on this branch, Lunch and Learn, but I'm going to go ahead and navigate there. And we're going to start actually getting this code set up and working towards building this API.
So just for anybody that's not familiar with APIs or REST APIs, it's generally just a way for software to interact with each other on a very large basis. So if other people build a software, you want to use that software instead of writing everything yourself, you can tap into that. And REST API is a certain framework that is very, very commonly used in API world. Sorry, Keith, just to explain a little bit.
The context is helpful, so thank you for jumping in. Okay, let me share my screen again. All right, so everyone hopefully should be able to see this GitHub link. So again, this is a pinned comment in the chat, Python API example, and then we're going to specifically be working off of this Lunch and Learn branch, just because I probably will tweak around with the master branch here. So the starter code will always be living on Lunch and Learn here. It's not too much code here to work with. So if you really needed to, you could kind of like copy and paste all of these individual files. But I also put some setup instructions over here in the README. So I'm going to slowly start working through this. If you don't understand all of the logistics of like cloning with GitHub and all of that, don't worry too much about that. Know that the code will be here for you. And I just kind of want to start working towards what we can do on the API side. So I'm going to go ahead and download this code. I know that this terminal is really, really small right now. So let's see if I can, oh no, make it a bit bigger. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and make a directory. I'll just call it Lunch Learn. Go into my Lunch Learn. It went dark in my office.
Wait, did it actually?
Yeah, we're good. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you clone this code, but I have this little Lunch Learn directory that I'll just put it in, and then we're going to go ahead and with this GitHub code, I would recommend forking this repo first, just so you can basically push all of this code locally. It gets a little bit confusing for me to do that on my own repo, so I'm going to just go ahead and clone it. And I'm specifically cloning this lunch and learn branch here. Minor detail, it doesn't matter too much. I think if you cloned the master branch, you'd still be in a good spot. You just might have some extra code. Okay. And now, once you've done that, you should have all this code within this Python API example folder. Because the terminal is not the best place to watch me write code, I'm going to open up Visual Studio to actually start working on this. I just actually might want to, I want to make sure that I'm all the way in that Python API example folder. So I'm going to just do this one more time. Like, there we go. All right, so if you've been able to clone it, and really, honestly, don't worry if like you're a little bit behind and you don't have everything here. The code will still be there if you check back on this video in a week. But I think the basic thing that I want to start showing is with some very simple template code, we can already basically have like an API spun up. So we're going to do a couple steps. So in the GitHub README, we want to navigate into this directory, and we're there in Visual Studio Code. And then we want to make sure that we have all of the requirements for this repo. So common practice, if you're ever working on a Python-based repository, it's good to have a requirements.txt file. What this file does for you is that you can put all of your dependency libraries in the requirements.txt file. And so what we see here, we have Flask, Flasker, Flask RESTful, Airtable, and Gunicorn. And the nice thing about this is we have all of these libraries here. And if I go ahead and run, and hopefully you can all see this, pip install -r. So the -r is specifying we're going to be installing Python libraries from a requirements.txt file, requirements.txt, and run that. It should download all of your libraries. I think depending on where you're installing Python, note that sometimes it's pip, sometimes it's pip3. So for me, it's actually going to be pip3 install requirements.txt. If I close this, you can see that a little bit more clearly. Go ahead and run this. And you'll see that I have all of those repository or those libraries already installed. But that should set you all up to be able to kind of run this code. I'll pause there real quick. Is there any questions that I probably should address in the comments right now, Tina?
Nope.
Or we good right now?
Nope, we are good.
Cool. Okay. So we've now installed, so going back to the GitHub README, we've installed all of our Python libraries. And now we're just going to start with template code. And sometimes you'd be like, oh, hey, like, why aren't we starting from complete scratch? Like, why aren't we starting from a total blank slate? And I would say with something like this, it's like better to just have like a very rough template code in front of you, run that and just make changes as you need, because this is the type of thing where it's like, I need the template code to know where to kind of start building off of. It's kind of hard to remember how to do this exactly totally from scratch. So I like having like template code in this type of scenario. So I'm going to go to app.py. And if you want to just see what's in there so far, we really have a very, very basic function. I'll zoom in and zoom out on this code so you can hopefully see it all, but I want to zoom out just so you can kind of see the full scale real quick. But basically, we're using this library called Flasker. And so just to give some context on these libraries here. Flask is a very common Python library for building servers. It's pretty lightweight. It's lighter weight than I would, say Django. You can spin up something quickly. So Flask is a good option for APIs for that reason. Flask RESTful gives us some additional resources to just play with the doc strings and have a certain syntax that we can ultimately make documentation for these endpoints with. And then Flasker is pretty cool. It lets us basically package up these doc strings that we'll kind of walk through down here into a nice API call. And what's really helpful about this, and you'll see it in just a second, but Swagger is a very common kind of way to document your API code. The Swagger spec, I think, was what it used to be called, and now they've kind of moved to the open API like spec definition of like defining APIs. But basically, it lets us have nice interactive documentation that we can generate as part of our project. So basically, this is a good template to start off of. And what we'll see in a second is kind of how this all fits together. So I'm going to go ahead and open a terminal. And if we look at our folder structure, there's this app.py. That's what we're going to run here. I'm going to do Python 3 app.py. And we see we have this little server running. So just to kind of give you some context on how this is all packaged together, down here, we're running our little app. And all the initialization is just like through these lines here. And we have one single API call here. And I'm going to break this down all in a second. So within that terminal window, if I open that back up, we see that it's running on this location. This is a local endpoint.
Question for you, Keith.
Yep.
Are there any equivalent Swagger for Django?
I'm sure there's something that you can define an API with Django. Off the top of my head, I'm not familiar, but I'm sure that if you look up Swagger for Django, I'm guessing you'll probably find something. Okay, so I went to that URL it pointed to me when I was running the app, and it seems like a very scary thing to have here, like not found. Like the nice thing though is like at least it's telling us not found, but within here, the really small text on your screen probably, if I just add a /API docs to the end of this, with that little bit of template code that we have, we already have this like nice little like UI adhering to the Swagger spec that has one single method in it. It has this get uppercase method. And in the world of API calls, a get request to just uppercase text is probably never needed, but it's a cool little demo to just show like with this little bit of code that we have, what we already can start doing. So locally, we can be in this little interactive environment, and I could just do something like hello world. I could run this code, and as we see, we get back hello world in all caps. Very, very basic API request, but we see kind of the request URL that is being passed here. And what's nice about this is this still might seem kind of like foreign territory, but what's really nice as we're going to work towards in this session is that it's pretty easy if you said like you're a backend engineer and you're trying to give a front-end engineer some API calls that they can hit to access all of your code. Having a little set of documentation on a web page like this makes it super easy to play around with things, test things. Like it gives you like how you can do a curl command to hit that endpoint. It tells you what the endpoint is that you can run a local request at to hit that endpoint. So very nice little details here. I think the one thing I will mention though is right now this endpoint, if you guys try to hit this is very much just referring to my local machine. It's not going to yet be like publicly accessible, but we'll get towards that as we go in the video. All right. Tina, I hear that you've unmuted yourself. I don't know if there's a question that I'm about to answer,
Oh,
but
you can hear me unmuting myself? Oh,
I guess I can. Yeah.
that's a good way to like. It's like
I was
wait.
getting ready for a question from the audience. I'm not good at multitasking, so I apologize if people have been asking a bunch of questions throughout.
Nah, we're actually good. So one question
Cool.
from Yash. We can also do this with Streamlit to make our website?
Um, I mean, Streamlit, I feel like has so many other great features and purposes. I don't know if I would necessarily like use Streamlit to set up like endpoints to run like an API, but like you can very easily host Streamlit applications that anyone could access to do all sorts of other things. I feel like I often use Streamlit more for data sciencey, like quick prototypes versus like a API that other people on my team need to access. So what I'm going to show with deploying this Flask app will be probably very relevant to Streamlit applications, but I wouldn't probably build my APIs using Streamlit. I would probably use a more proven tool for this specific purpose in Flask.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. So we're at a good little spot here. There's a few different steps we need to make to actually make this a more robust API and actually do something meaningful with this, and actually deploy it. But I think that this is a good spot to just maybe like ask some people viewing what is an interesting like little API endpoint that we could add. So I want to make the scope of this a little bit refined. Like, let's have some sort of API endpoint that does something with a string. So, it could maybe duplicate a string a certain number of times. Like, throw out some ideas maybe in the comments real quick on like different things we could do with string manipulation, and we'll spin up a little API to do that. We'll see if if we get anything from the comments here, but I'd be curious just to hear some people's thoughts on a little API endpoint we could do, similar to like uppercasing things, but I just want to change up the parameters a bit. So let's try to make it a little bit more complex than uppercasing.
I just clicked again. I think it also might be helpful, Keith, if you don't mind explaining the full process. So say you have this
Yeah.
API here, it does something, and then you have that endpoint, and then how, after we obviously need to deploy it, how would that be accessed from
Yeah.
somebody else?
It's a great question. I definitely will show it full scale. I could just try it real quick now with my local instance up. I just don't know if it will work properly. So we're going to do a live little demo.
While we're doing that, please in the comments write down what kind of function should we do. Something simple that we can do within the API. We
Okay.
could
And
do
so,
uppercasing, things with strings, splitting strings, appending things to strings, just giving some random ideas over here. Write in the comments, write in the chat what you think we can do. Thank you. I hope that's helpful for anybody who is curious as to how that would work. I understand, like when you're first looking at something like a REST API like this, I get that it could be a little bit confusing, like seeing what's curl, like how do things,
yeah,
how is it actually being exposed? So I think this would be really helpful. So before deploying it, just to like showcase, like, oh, this is the full flow. You're building this thing that does something, and then how do you actually access the thing that's being built?
definitely. Okay. So I'm going to, we're going to real quick just show this with Python. So I could be anywhere in the world. If we deployed this, I could be anywhere in the world, and basically this same type of methodology will work. We'll start with just our local endpoint. So like this local endpoint wouldn't work anywhere in the world, but as we build up, yeah, we will get stuff that can work more globally.
And the reason is because this hasn't been deployed yet. So it's
Yeah,
currently still
exactly.
just on Keith's local machine.
Exactly. So I took from the API the little Swagger docs there. I took the request URL that they provided with me. So I'm going to just try to make a little request to that spot. I I have too many tabs. Okay. So paste that in. We'll delete this real quick. There's a couple of ways we could call this. I think I'll start with just using this URL endpoint. And we're going to do a request.get URL endpoint. And then we need to pass in our parameters. So if we look at the parameters that this is expecting, it's expecting a field called text. We see that that is defined in our code in our app with, right here. It's expecting text. So that's kind of how we're defining it. When we're processing it downstream, we get text, but it's expecting a text field. So I'm going to pass in then params equal text. And then we could do something like, this is some lowercase text, or let's just do this is some text. And if we run this code here, it doesn't do anything because I didn't print anything. But if I set response equals request.get, I could do print response dot JSON. And if we run this, we see that we get back, the uppercase text. So that's pretty cool. So this is like our locally run endpoint. We run it this way, response.json, we get back, this is some text. Another thing that's useful to know about is like I can also access the status code here. So like when it's successful, you should get a status code 200. So this is all running locally, but we're kind of building up to having this hosted publicly. All right. With that, I guess, is there any ideas for that API endpoint?
It looks like so a lot of this is over my head, but it's fine. Okay. I think just try to rewatch it. The whole concept, there might be a lot of terminologies and things, but the concept is that you have something and you're trying to package that into a piece of software, which then could be accessible by other people. So it's like that. Everything else is just like details about how to exactly do it. Yeah. So a question, can we run like Python notebook files, or should we use just Py files?
I would recommend just Python files. Basically, the way that I would think about this is, let's say you're doing some data analysis code and you start writing some functions that help you do your data analysis. Maybe someone else on your team needs to access that type of code and that functionality. Basically, what you're going to want to do for them is define like what the inputs are, what the outputs are, and then just encapsulate that chunk of data science functionality within a class like we have here. So I would probably honestly, depending on how you're structuring your Python notebooks, you probably have chunks of logic in different cells. Like you could probably maybe try to break out those chunks of logic in different cells into, various, each cell has its own little API call to do that same type of functionality. But you're probably not going to want to actually use, your IPython notebook to set this API up. On the other side, though, is to do this type of thing where you're hitting an API and playing around with different input parameters. Yeah, you could definitely use a Python notebook, a Jupyter notebook to actually access the API and run all sorts of different things. So from the client side, yeah, you definitely could use a Python notebook. From the server side and actually hosting the Flask endpoint or the API, you're not going to be using a IPython notebook.
Thank you.
Cool. And I don't know if I saw too much on the comments on different things we could do, but I just want to show a little bit more complex example of an API endpoint, just so you can kind of see us build up, and then we'll actually do a more real world example of that book reviewing idea that I mentioned. And I think we have just about enough time to squeeze this all in. So it's going to be a lot of information. This live stream will be here for everyone, but I'm trying to package a lot in quickly. Cool.
Let's do it.
So here's the thing is this is pretty intimidating. It's really cool that with just this docstrings definition and this kind of formatting, we get this Swagger spec just through how these libraries are operating together. It's really cool that, like, again, just to reiterate that this all in here is generating that website. Like if I change this to like message and I reran the app, or actually I think the app will rerun automatically behind the scenes because it notices I have an update. If I open this again, we see now we have message here. So like the doc strings I'm editing is directly influencing the parameters that we see inside this Swagger doc that will let people call these APIs. So very cool. But the thing is like the reason I kind of told people to clone this code versus like write it all from yourself, like this is intimidating to try to remember how to write in format just from scratch. So I feel like the way that I go about doing something like this these days and trying to generate at least a baseline for my next API call, if I'm going to use this docstring format, is use our handy dandy ChatGPT techniques and see what it can generate for me. So I just want to show a cool little example of, like, let's say instead of just uppercasing text, I wanted to be able to uppercase text, maybe duplicate it a number of times. Maybe it doesn't get uppercase. Like there's multiple parameters here. What I can do is I can copy all of this code here, and I can go to our good friend ChatGPT. And again, this is just an idea. You don't have to follow this format. I have GPT-4, but you can also use GPT 3.5 because more people probably has GPT 3.5. I'll use this. But this is like the type of thing that I do when I'm trying to write a new endpoint. I might just be like, given my template code below, generate a new API class, or generate a class called string generator that can take in a message, has an optional parameter duplication factor, which is the number of times the string should be duplicated, and an optional parameter capitalization, which can be upper, lower, or none, and generate the Python code and doc strings for it. This is like not even the best explanation, but I'm going to just paste in the code I have already and just see what it kind of spits out. Okay. So I think it's giving me a little more than I need, but one thing that I really get excited about is it has this new class. I can just copy all of this. I see some pretty good code here. And I'm just going to copy this, paste it in below. We have now two classes. I don't know what all this stuff is, and sometimes, ChatGPT is going to kind of hallucinate a bit. And from doing this a good amount, I know that I can probably just get rid of that. Small changes like I don't need a parser here. I can just get things directly from request.args. But the cool thing here is now behind the scenes, by just adding this code and then adding this API add resource generate and API.add resource uppercase text. And I guess I pasted in a little too much, but if I rerun this, I'm going to try to close some terminals here. I have a bunch open. Again, I'm over here in, it gave me this weird not found URL. if I go to /API docs, and I know that this is really small, probably on your screens to read. Oh no, we got an error. What is the error? Let's see, what might be the error here? Let's see. Just gonna real quick. I'm gonna just not have any Python code in here real quick. We're just gonna pass. Let it restart behind the scenes. The biggest thing is I want to just show that there's a new API endpoint there, and we can then work on getting the logic up and running for how it works. Oh no. You gotta love getting internal server errors. Anyone have any recommendations on how to fix this? You probably can't even see all the code right now. So if it doesn't work, I'll just skip it. I think the thing I just did want to show is like, you can start using like API endpoints that you call to start generating like very interesting things using ChatGPT. Sometimes you run into a little bit of issues like this, but it usually can get you most of the way there. Doing something like this. Let's see. I might have not actually regenerated the server. Yeah, it doesn't like the, given I commented all of this out and it's still giving me an issue, it doesn't like something that I've done here. Oh, it's this description here, I think, probably. It doesn't like the double colon.
Can you tell him the zoom error section a little bit?
Say it again?
It says, can you zoom the error section a little bit?
Oh, okay.
I think just the terminal.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the thing it saw, oh no, is that I had double colons basically in this docstring method. And this was because I let ChatGPT generate it for me. So it definitely helped me a bit, but it was basically doing description colon. And with this syntax that's very dependent on colons, having another colon later on with capitalization style, I think caused an issue. So I bet you if I now rerun the server and it looks like it restarted, now, okay, look at that. Now we have two endpoints. It has multiple things that we could pass in. Notice only one is required here. And we have these different, types. And the cool thing here is now that we've fixed that little error we had, I'm going to uncomment this code that we initially had. And let's see what happens when we start playing around with this new endpoint. So I'm going to say, hello world. We're going to duplicate it 5 times. So we should get hello world, hello world, hello world, hello world, hello world. And we're going to capitalize it as uppercase. Execute that. Looks like we got another error. Let's see what we got here. If I go back to the code. It doesn't like the type, duplication factor, non-int of type string. So I'm guessing right here, it's actually parsing it as a string instead of an int. If I rerun this, try it out. Hello world. 5, upper, execute. Look at that. We get hello world 5 times with uppercase text. And it read all of that via our API call by getting these different parameters that are defined in the doc string. So we have our message, which is required here that we specified. We have our duplication factor, which is not required, so I wouldn't have to actually pass that. And then we have this capitalization value. And then just kind of reminder of how this might look full scale. If I go to our new endpoint, which we called uppercase, and I do a get, we called it generate, and I pass in text, and I just try to run that. Looks like I try to run it in the same terminal. Basically, I can run this code API test. I guess I am having issues. What did I call this? I think I called this message or something. Message, yeah, it's not text, it's message, and that's required, so you're not going to get a good response. Message, run that, and if I print out the response, we see we get generated text. This is some text. I could pass in the optional parameters like capitalization. I will say upper. I run this. We see we now get, this is some text uppercased. If I run now with a duplication factor, and we say that this is, I don't know, 4, we see we get generated text like that. And so, again, using the Swagger docs, the reason we knew that it was this URL was because it's the request URL here. And then anything after the question, these are the text parameters that we can add. And Python and the request library let us kind of add them in nice, more Pythonic ways by doing kind of the syntax we have here. Cool. So we're running close to time, and we don't have this deployed API endpoint yet, but let's do that really quick. I was hoping to actually connect with Airtable and do some actual book reviews in addition to GET requests, but post requests. I would say like my call to action on that is that it'll be part of a tutorial that I'll post later, but I do want to at least show the full scale, have a public API endpoint up that you can have someone test and make calls to. So that's what I'm going to show with the remaining time here. So to do this, I'm going to first look at my code. We've made some changes there. I'm going to go ahead and we're on the branch lunch and learn. Just because I don't want to change up this kind of baseline code, I'm going to do git checkout-b final lunch and learn code. That creates a new branch, final lunch and learn code, and it doesn't have anything committed yet. I can add staged files that we've already have in our GitHub repo by doing git add-u. This is a nice little trick because sometimes you do git add period. This will add every file that you have, and sometimes there's files you don't want to have. So git add-u just adds the files that are already have already been added. See app.py and requirements.txt. If I then go ahead and commit that, final API endpoint code, and push that origin final lunch and learn code. We now have that pushed to GitHub. If I go to GitHub, I look at my branches right here. We see we have final lunch and learn code. That's awesome. And here's the fun part. There's different websites to do this, but I think like when we think of deploying, oftentimes we think of like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud Platform. And all of those are great for many reasons, but oftentimes if we want to just deploy something quickly, there's better solutions, there's quicker, easier solutions that have taken away a lot of the complexity out of deploying something. So one that I have liked a lot recently is a site called render.com. Yeah, definitely not the only site that you can do this. Another popular one is Vercel, Vercel, I believe, that you could deploy these quickly. Heroku still is a little bit more of like the original player in this field, maybe a little bit less up to date, but Heroku is another one. But you can create a profile on render.com, and basically they've just simplified a lot of the like logistics of deploying a Flask application. So I'm going to go ahead, I already have an account. I'm going to create a new service. And so you'll have to create an account to basically follow along at this point, but there's a lot of free tier stuff. So I'm going to just use the free tier to show this, this deployment. But build and deploy from a Git repository. I'm going to do that. I'm going to connect our Python API example that we've been working off of. We'll call this like Lunch and Learn API. You might want to namespace this like to be more specific and unique to your company or organization. With the API we currently set up, there's no sort of authentication, which is something that you'll want to consider as you make this more robust. So like what we deploy here will be accessible probably to anyone, and that's not great practices from a coding perspective. Like ideally you would have a API key or only be able to run things based on authentication, but for the purpose of this, I think it's fine. And the purpose of like testing something out quickly, it's pretty fine. We're going to use that final lunch and learn code branch. We want it to install the requirements.txt folder that has all the libraries it needs. This start command, you want to have gunicorn app that just kind of runs the Flask app behind the scenes. We're going to go to the free tier. And I think that should be it. Make sure you have, if you're doing this on your own, make sure you have gunicorn in, or gunicorn, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, in your requirements.txt. I go ahead and create this web service. Hopefully it deploys okay. We see that right here, it's like installing all of the packages that we have in our local code that we push to GitHub. While it does this, it might run into an error too, and we can resolve that. But one thing that I really like to note is like if you have an API key or something in your code and you're deploying to a site like Render, well, we don't have anything right now. Like this environment variable space is very helpful for doing things. So if I had like an OpenAI API key, I might add it as an environment variable here, and then I could access it with the code that is deployed. You'd paste in that secret value. Another thing you can do here is specify the Python version. So if you need to run 3.10.10 or something like that, you could save it as environment variable here, and it will know to deploy. And as we see, we got a little error here. Gunicorn command not found. Is that because we didn't add it to our requirements.txt? And look at that, it wasn't actually added here. That's my bad. Add that real quick. And as we're kind of nearing the hour, I feel like this will be the last hurrah of seeing this actually live and working. But I'm happy to start answering questions too, because some of this might take a little time to build.
I think we're doing a pretty good job on the chat side of things, and people are understand the kind of like the structure of what you're doing. So the more exact details they can watch on the replay. So you did a really
Yeah,
good job. Just people were saying that as well and explaining how it all works. Um, in the last few minutes, I think it would be really cool just kind of explain like the Airtable stuff, like how like what is happening. Like maybe you can also leave that as an exercise for everybody, as well as go check out your channel later. But I think it would
definitely.
be cool to explain how what you can do with it.
Cool. I'll say a few words here. So I just first off want to just quickly reiterate, like, look at this syntax for how to describe these. You can generate new get and post requests based on this syntax, and you can look up like Flask RESTful and Flasker libraries to see how to format that, as well as use ChatGPT. But I do want to show that, like, ideally, we would not be just doing these kind of trivial things like uppercasing text. Ideally, we'd be pushing to a database, writing to a database, pulling from a database. And ultimately, there is actually some code that is living in that GitHub repo that is doing a lot of that. And actually, look at that. We have our deploy live. So I'll show the final hurrah of testing this with an API endpoint in a second. But worth noting that if you want to explore a little bit further and see how you could integrate this to something more, Airtable is a great, like, lightweight, Airtable.com is a great, like, lightweight, basically Google Sheets type thing that you can interact with programmatically. I like it a lot because it is very much like a Google Sheets, but it becomes very easy to interact with programmatically. You can get an API key by just creating an account here on Airtable, going to account, or actually going to Developer Hub and creating a new token here and giving it probably read and write scope to your records. And then basically you can start, where's my table? Once you create that key, you can start adding rows to this little database via Python using the PyAirtable library. How to do that is shown on the master branch of this repo in book review and app.py. So if you look at this code, you can see a little bit more sophisticated of API calls. And then actually looking at the logistics, there's this book review.py file that has the actual like API setup to PyAirtable. So it's all happening here. You set up a table, and then basically you can run some code using that, getting all of the records in your tables, adding records, etc. And then that is called in app.py by either, getting a record. We see that we call book review get all records and posting a record. And you can look at all the doc strings here too to see how you would formulate the doc strings to generate the URL. But this also, adds a record to that PyAirtable. I went through that super quickly. I'm going through it super quickly, not so that you understand every little detail, because I know that I definitely wouldn't understand every detail of what I just showed, but you just know that the code is here on these different branches for you to take a look at, and knowing that I will post a video on this. But finally, I guess with further, like kind of the final hurrah of this session, we see that we had a live deploy of our code on render.com. And within render, we also see that they give us this nice URL, lunchandlearnapi.onrender.com. And so if you want to try this at home, it probably would work. I don't know how many people, if we're all concurrently doing this, it might break it because we're on the free tier. But if I now go to this URL and go to API docs, we see on a like real URL. So this is Lunch and Learn API. I'll paste it in here so you can see it a little bit bigger. But going here, we actually get our API endpoints to play around with. And I could, run the duplication factor. I could do it lowercase. And if I run this, we actually see that it is generating stuff. And then the final last cool thing is that going back to our little API test endpoint, now instead of using this little local thing, if you are on your side running this command here, and if you watch this after the fact, I might have shut down this API. So hopefully you can follow the endpoint because or maybe I'll keep it up for a bit, but run this slash generate or slash uppercase, depending on what one you want to do. And I run the Python file. Look at that. We actually get a response back hitting the actual server. So like this code should work for people, and I'll make it bigger. Work for people locally. We're almost there. Cool. So like, this is now a live API that you can make a GET request to. I added those details of like, using Airtable. If you want to extend this project, I'll also make a YouTube video on it. I'll pause there. Sorry, I squeezed a lot. I tried to squeeze a lot into this. Hopefully, might have to rewatch it to get some of the details, but I'm happy to stick around if Tina keeps the live open for a couple more minutes to actually answer some more questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you did a really good job overviewing everything, and everybody, like, it's okay if you don't understand exact details about things. Keith is gonna make a much more fleshed out video about this, so definitely go to his channel, which is linked in the description and also pinned in the comments as well, and just look out for that video coming out soon. But hopefully that was able to give you a really good overview of how these things work and get your brain thinking about the things that you can possibly do now, which is the very big point of these lunch and learns. So if there's any questions, I think we can stick around for around like 5 minutes to 10 minutes or so. It looks like a lot of people ask questions throughout the live as well, so totally fine. If there's nothing super additional, you might like have to look through the recording a couple of times, and then you might have specific questions when you're implementing the code yourself. Thanks so much for all the information. Thank you, Keith.
Definitely, it was a lot of fun. I love this. The live format is like kind of newer to me. I'm very used to like recording my my tutorials and my over a long period of time cutting things out. So it was fun to try to do this live. It adds a lot of, I think, little details that you sometimes don't see in a more fleshed out pre-recorded tutorial. Like because we generated some code snippets using ChatGPT live, we had some live debugging that we had to do, and that's always a little stressful on the live stream, but I think it worked out well with like trying to figure out, what might be going on, kind of utilizing the strategy of like, okay, I just wanted to comment out all of this actual Python code, and then that let me know that, okay, the actual issue is in the doc strings here, and then I could fix the doc strings. So like little strategies like that, I think are important with the live factor. And honestly, one of the biggest skills of becoming a very professional software engineer is the ability to solve things quickly and to be confident that you can work through the issues that you're bound to run into. No matter how good you are, you're going to run into a lot of issues, and it's a matter of do you have the resilience to work through those issues?
Yep. I don't think you can give any developer and be like, do this on your first go. I think that would definitely very difficult to do. So I think it was the live format. I don't know, Keith, maybe you should do more lives.
I should. I like that it's pre-scheduled too. It's a commitment of like getting something out there and doing a session and having everyone join. And it's fun. I think it's easier to do than pre-record when there's no set date or anything.
You get too much in your head, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
And thank you so much, William, for supporting the channel. I'm really glad that it was useful. Appreciate it. Sorry, go on.
Just one call to action. I just feel like one thing I just really want to make sure everyone, I want to stress and just make sure everyone kind of understands with this little API format that we went through. Like, I think one thing I would stress here is like we built some pretty simple endpoints, but one thing that I would like love for people to just think about is that this code right in here and this code right in this GET request, this could be any Python code in the world, pretty much. Like you could write any Python code you want. So I think like the real magic here is like these programs that you're running and testing out locally, like you have the ability to write, the logic in here or import logic here, and then like deploy it on a render.com type site, deploy it live, and then have anyone be able to access it. Like there's something really powerful and exciting there, especially when you're working with other developers that don't have the data science background that need to run the same type of methodologies, same types of functions.
It's the flexibility and the ability to
Yeah,
interact with other people and other things. And even as a data scientist or data people, doing this genuinely, I think, is really helpful to do. I don't know if you would agree with that, Keith. Like just knowing how to do this kind of stuff. Is
yeah,
it technically like on the software engineering side? Yes, but especially the way that the world is moving now, using APIs, doing development, it's something that I think data people more and more need to do as well. Like gone are the days when you just sit there and do your own like data things.
definitely. And yeah, just as you kind of on that front, like if you are a data person and you need to like share your code with the front end engineering team, like this is a perfect reason for spinning up an API. It's just such a pleasant thing, I think, if you can, yeah, take it to that next layer and just give them an endpoint that they can call to run your code. Just simplifies a lot of the logistical details. So I definitely second what Tina just said there.
So thank you, Keith. Very professional. So it looks like we are good with questions. So Omai and Athena, can you let the live chat? I couldn't find it. Can you leave the live chat? So the live chat should. I don't have control over that, unfortunately. I do specify for the live chat to not disappear, but for some reason it doesn't. I will try it again because technically the stream setting is such that the live chat should be there. So I do not know why. I apologize if it isn't later. Okay, cool. The chat is there. Yeah, that's what I thought as well. So microservices is the next step up from APIs. Any opinions about that? We'll take that as our last question. Actually, there's two questions left.
I mean, oftentimes, with if you're spinning up microservices, they might be like, I feel like a lot of times, a lot of these different services you might spin up. Yeah, I would say a microservice, if I defined it as a microservice, it's a little bit more robust, doing a bit more, but like a big part of any sort of systems architecture is like the API layers in between these different services that is communicating. So I don't know if I would say it's like the next level up. Yeah, it's kind of the more robust component. And then like, the microservices are interacting with other services. And oftentimes that's through like API, maybe a REST API type methodology, if I understand kind of what you're saying correctly.
So last question. I have a question for Keith. Will the indents be key in this type of API calling?
I believe that it is going to be actually important to have things indented within the colons here. So I would recommend probably, trying to keep this type of indenting syntax pretty streamlined. One thing I will note though is if you look up the docs for like Flasker, so I'll try to just pop that open real quick. There's different ways you can define these doc strings that isn't require a certain set of indenting. So if you kind of look through the Flasker documentation, like you could define a YAML file. I guess that depends on indenting, but there's like JSON spec definitions, and that won't require certain indenting. So there's different ways to do this. Another library that I was actually playing around with, but didn't have a chance to integrate with this video is the connection, CONNEXION library. And that lets you define like a separate YAML file that could serve as your API endpoint. So with how I showed it, indenting is pretty important, but there's different ways to go about doing this, such as this like JSON-y type format. So look at the Flasker documentation if you're curious about that.
Cool. All right. So let us end here. Let me see. I can't find where the chat went. Okay, let us end here. Thank you all so much for joining, and thank you again to Keith. This was super helpful. I think especially in providing, just showing people what it is that's possible there. Oftentimes, the hardest part is just getting started. And again, if you want to have really amazing in-depth tutorials, Keith is the person to go to. So definitely go check out his channel, subscribe, and then something much more fleshed out and it's like edited and things like that will be coming out on his channel as well. So thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you guys in the next video or live stream.
Thanks, Tina, for having me. Thanks, everyone, for joining. This was fun.
All right, we are going to end this now. Bye. Okay, we're done.
Cool.
Yeah.